I've been working these waters for 23 years, and in that time, I've seen 14 rookies step aboard the Mary Catherine. Most don't last a month. Hell, most don't even make it a week. It's not the labor that breaks them hauling traps in. 40 degrees Fahrenheit water with 35 miles per hour winds will humble a man quick enough. It's not the isolation either. 12 hours in the dark with nothing but engine noise and the slap of waves against rusted steel. No, what does them in is they don't listen. They think they know better. They figure the old hands are just trying to spook them with tall tales and superstitions cooked up from too many lonely nights on the water. That's how they end up missing. I'm still here because I follow the rules. Every single one, no matter how ridiculous they sound. Well, let me tell you, some of them do sound pretty damn ridiculous when you first hear them, ridiculous or not. They're why I'm still breathing, while Tommy Hendricks, Mike Cafield, and all the others are just names on a memorial plaque down at the harbor master's office. The kid they sent me last Tuesday looked promising, though. Danny Morrison, 22, fresh out of some community college marine tech program, big hands, calloused from real work, didn't even flinch when Captain Reeves laid out the job. Night shift, lobster traps, minimum wage, plus a cut of the catch if we actually brought back anything worth selling. Kid even had his own gear, which was more than I could say for the last 3 they'd saddled me with. Good gear too, Grundon's foul weather pants, insulated boots that looked like they'd seen some use. Ever worked a boat before? Asked him as we loaded supplies that first evening. October on the Maine coast, the sun already dipping at 6:30, the cold sinking into your bones. The air tasted like salt and diesel, with that sharp Thames that meant winter wasn't far off. Some, he said, hefting a crate of herring bait like it was nothing. My uncle runs a charter down in Portsmouth. Mostly took tourists out for striped bass. Different from this, I know, but I've been on the water. I grunted. Tourist fishing and real fishing were about as alike as a house cat and a mountain lion, but at least he wasn't completely green. The last kid they'd sent me, Kevin something, had never even seen the ocean before. It lasted for hours before he was begging to head back to shore. Never did find out what became of him after that first night. The Mary Catherine looked like hell under the harbor lights. It's 38 feet of patched fiberglass and rust stains, her wheelhouse windows held together with duct tape and prayers. The paint was peeling off her hull in long strips. And her engine made noises that'd worry a mechanic, but she was seaworthy. More importantly, she'd been working these waters since 1987. Some boats, you take them to new fishing grounds, and everything changes the currents, the bottom, the way the weather hits. The Mary Catherine knew her territory, knew where the ledges were, where the water got deep fast. She doesn't look like much, Danny said. I could hear him trying to keep the doubt out of his voice as he eyed the duct-taped radar antenna and the jury-rigged hydraulic system Captain Reeves had been about to fix for 6 months. She'll keep you alive if you don't do anything stupid, I told him, checking the fuel gauge one last time. That's more than you can say for those pretty fiberglass cruisers tied up in the marina. Half of them wouldn't last an hour. In the conditions we work in, we cast off at 11:15 p.m. just like always. The forecast called for light fog rolling in around 2 a.m. Northeast winds at 15 to 20 knots. Nothing we couldn't handle, but rough enough to keep the weekend warriors tied to their slips. Drinking beer and lying about the fish they'd catch tomorrow, which was fine by me. Fewer boats out here, fewer chances for trouble. Danny handled the lines well enough. Didn't get in my way as I steered us out of the harbor. He even anticipated which way I'd need the bow to swing when we cleared the breakwater, loosening the right fender before I had to ask. The lighthouse beams swept over us every 30 seconds as we passed the outer markers, and I saw him glancing. Back at the shore, lights already fading behind us. Gets dark fast out here, he said. One hand on the cabin rail as the boat started taking the longer swells of open water. It stays that way too, I replied, watching the depth sounder. 43 feet and dropping as we headed toward the first string of traps. The green glow of the GPS showed our position as a steady blip moving northwest toward coordinates I'd memorized years ago. Listen, kid, I said, throttling back as we neared the waypoint. There are rules out here, not suggestions, not superstitions. You follow them exactly every time, or you end up like the others. The others? His eyes flicked to mine, but he didn't ask. I cut the engine and let the boat drift. Out here, 3 miles from shore, the only sounds were the slap of waves against the hull and the distant hum of the bilge pumps cycling on and off. The running lights cast red and green reflections on the black water, and beyond that, nothing. The fog hadn't reached us yet, but I could smell it coming that thick. Wet scent that meant visibility would drop to maybe 20 feet within the hour. Rule 1, I said, reaching for the million-candle power spotlight mounted on the wheelhouse. If the foghorn blows 3 times after midnight, you get below deck. Immediately. No looking around. No questions. Just get down and stay there until it stops. Danny was watching me carefully now, probably trying to figure out if I was messing with him. Foghorn, he said. I thought we were the only boat out here, I said, flicking. On the spotlight and scanning for the first buoy, the white beam cut through the darkness like a blade. Rule 2. Never open the starboard bait locker after 2 a.m. I don't care if we run out of bait. I don't care if every trap comes up empty. We use what's in the port locker, and that's it. There it was, the orange and black buoy bobbing, about 50 yards off our starboard bow, riding the swells like a cork. I turned the wheel and gave the engine a short burst to bring us alongside. Rule 3, I said as Danny moved to the stern to hook the buoy with the gaff. The mast lantern goes out sometimes. When it does, you leave it out. Don't try to relight it. Don't even touch the switch. The hydraulic winch groaned to life as the trap line went taut. Water streamed from the rope as it came up through the block. 40 feet down, coming up. Slow and steady. Danny watched the line, checking for tangles, but I could tell he was still listening to every word. Rule 4, I continued, as we lowered the trap back down, watching the line disappear into the black water. Sometimes we hear knocking from the hull. Sounds like someone tapping on the side of the boat. Don't knock back. The next buoy came. Into view, Danny hooked it without hesitation. Rule 5, I said. When we're heading in, if you see someone standing on the rocks at the point, turn away before they turn their head toward you. Someone standing on the rocks at 4 a.m., said. Rule 6. I ignored him. When we're pulling traps, if one feels heavier than it should, we cut the line. Immediately. Don't try to bring it up. Just cut it and move on. We moved to the next buoy, the boat's engine puttering quietly in the growing darkness. The shore lights had disappeared completely now, swallowed by distance and the curve of the earth. Even the lighthouse beams seemed dimmer, as if the approaching fog was swallowing the light before it could reach us. In Rule 7, I said as Danny hooked the second buoy with practiced ease. The galley hatch locks from the outside for a reason. Sometimes when we come aboard, it's already locked. If it's locked when we get here, it stays locked. Kid was quiet for a while as we worked through the first string of traps. Most were empty, not unusual for this time of year, but we pulled up a few keepers. Lobsters big enough to make the trip worthwhile. Danny knew how to band their claws without getting pinched, how to measure them with the brass gauge. His uncle had taught him well. It was just past midnight when the fog started rolling in for real. 1 minute we could see the lighthouse beam, sweeping across the water in its regular 30-second intervals. The next, it was gone, swallowed by a wall of gray-white mist that seemed to rise from the water like smoke. Jesus, Danny muttered, looking around as our world shrank to maybe 15 feet in any direction. The bow of the boat disappeared into the murk, and the running lights looked like colored ghosts in the thick air. It happens, I said. But I was already reaching for the radar, watching the screen paint slow green sweeps across the black display. It showed nothing but our own Boda-Bright blip in the center of a circle of electronic emptiness. That's when we heard the first knocking. 3 deliberate raps against the hull, right below where Danny was standing. Sharp and metallic, like someone hitting the fiberglass with a wrench. He looked down at the water, then back at me, eyebrows raised. Rule 4, I reminded him quietly. He nodded and moved away from the rail, but I could see the questions in his eyes. Smart kid. He was starting to understand that maybe these rules weren't just the ramblings of a paranoid old fisherman Hood. Spent too many nights alone on the water. The knocking came again, closer to the stern this time. Knock, 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 slow and deliberate. Like someone was testing the hull for weak spots, learning the shape of our boat. Danny opened his mouth to say something, then thought better of it. Good. The last kid would have been asking 20 questions by now. Probably would have knocked back just to see what happened. We finished the second string in silence, the fog so thick now that I couldn't see the bow from the wheelhouse. The radar stayed empty, but that didn't mean we were alone out here. Sometimes things that lived in these waters didn't show up on radar. Sometimes they didn't want to be found until they were ready. It was just after 1 a.m. when Danny pointed at something in the water off our port side. You see that? I looked where he was pointing, but the fog was too thick. A gray wall that seemed to press against the boat from all sides. See what? I thought I saw something moving, something big, bigger than a seal. I killed the engine and let us drift, listening. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of water lapping against the hull, and the distant ping of the depth sounder marking 52 feet. Then I heard it a sound like something large breaking the surface, maybe 30 yards away. It's not a whale. I'd heard whales before, the deep whoosh of air through blowholes. This was different, more deliberate, more aware. We're heading to the next string, I said, starting the engine again. And Danny, from now until we're back in harbor, you stick close to me. Don't wander around the boat alone. He nodded. And I could see he was starting to take this seriously. The fog, the sounds. The way I kept checking my watch and the radar, it was all adding up to something he didn't understand yet, but he was smart enough to be worried. As we headed toward the third string of traps, I found myself hoping this one might be different. Maybe Danny would be the one who listened, who followed the rules, made it through his first month without asking too many questions. Maybe he'd be the one who proved that not every greenhorn had to disappear into the fog like the others. But deep down, watching him scan the water with growing unease, I knew better. They always started out promising, and the sea always found a way to test them. The fog pressed in around us like a living thing, and somewhere in the distance, something knocked against another boat's hulls. Holes, low, patient, waiting. The weeks. That followed, blurred together like fog rolling over dark water. Danny stuck to the rules, and that surprised me more than I cared to admit. Most greenhorns, they hear the first knocking and panic, or they see that lantern flicker in their instincts. Kick in, got to fix it, got to make light. Not Danny. The kid learned fast. November hit the Maine coast like a fist. The Atlantic turned meaner waves coming in sets that could knock you flat if you weren't ready. The Mary Catherine took it like she always did, groaning and creaking, but never giving up. Her diesel engine coughed through the worst of it, and the hydraulic winch fought the salt air that wanted to seize every moving part. Weather's turning, I told Danny as we loaded gear for another night run. The harbor looked different in the pre-storm light, gray and restless. Fishing boats tugging at their moorings like they wanted to bolt for deeper water. How bad? He asked, checking the trap lines for fraying. Bad enough, I said, but we'll work through it. I watched him coil rope with hands that no longer shook when the temperature dropped. 3 weeks out here had toughened him up, burned away the college boy's softness. The sea doesn't care if you're comfortable. That night, the fog came in, thick as cotton batting. You couldn't see past the bow, couldn't tell where the water ended and the air began. We worked by sound and feel, the GPS our only anchor to reality. The depth sounder painted green lines across its screen 42 feet, 45-38. As we crossed over the underwater ridge where the best traps waited, it was just past 1 a.m. when we hit the first test. The trap line came up heavy, way heavier than it should have been, the winch groaned, straining against whatever was down there in the dark. Danny looked at me, question in his eyes. Rule 6, I said, reaching for the knife. The blade cut clean through the line. Below us, something big splashed away from the boat, the sound echoing through the fog like a gunshot. Danny's knuckles were white where he gripped the rail. But he didn't ask questions, didn't try to peer over the side to see what we'd cut loose. Good, I told him. Whatever's down there, it ain't worth finding out. The fog swirled around us, thick enough to taste. In the distance, something that might have been a whale breach tore, something that wanted us to think it was a whale. The splash was too deliberate, two-timed. Danny heard it too. I saw the way his shoulders tensed. We kept working. We moved. To the next string of traps, the engine puttering through water that felt heavier than it should. The bilge pump kicked on, cycling seawater out of the hull with mechanical persistence. Normal sounds, working boat sounds. But underneath them, if you listened close, other things moved in the water. There, Danny whispered, pointing into the fog. I saw it too. A shape moving parallel to us, maybe 30 yards out, too big for a seal, too purposeful for debris. It kept pace with the boat for maybe 10 minutes, then faded back into the gray wall. That surrounded us. Don't look at it, I said. Just work. The lantern on the mast started flickering around 2:30 a.m. That weak yellow light pulsed like a dying heartbeat, throwing crazy shadows across the deck. Danny's hand moved toward the switch pure instinct. Rule 3, I reminded him. His hand stopped. The lantern flickered twice more, then went dark. The fog seemed to press closer without that light, like it had been waiting for the darkness. But we kept working, trusting the GPS and the radar to keep us safe. That's when the knocking started. Slow, deliberate raps against the hull, 3 knocks. Pause, 3 more. Like someone down there had all the time in the world. Danny looked at me, eyebrows raised. Rule 4, I said quietly. He nodded and moved away from the rail. The knocking continued for maybe 5 minutes, moving along the boat's length like whatever was doing it was circling us, studying us. Then it stopped, leaving only the sound of water against fiberglass and the distant hum of electronics. What was that? Danny asked when we were sure it was over. Nothing you need to know about, I said. Just remember, knock back. We finished the night's work in relative quiet. The fog started to lift around 4 a.m., revealing stars that looked cold and distant. Danny had earned his pay, following every rule without question. When we tied up at the dock, I broke out the bottle of rum I kept in the wheelhouse. Here, I said, pouring 2 fingers into a coffee mug. You earned this. Danny took it without complaint. The rum burned, but it warmed you from the inside out. We sat in the wheelhouse while the engine cooled, listening to the tick of contracting metal and the slap of water against the dock. How long you been doing this? He asked. 23 years, I said. Since I was younger than you. Ever think about quitting? I considered the question. Every time I lose a greenhorn, I said. Then another one shows up, and I figure maybe this time will be different. Danny was quiet for a while, staring into his rum. The others you mentioned, Tommy and Mike. What happened to them? They didn't listen, I said. Thought they knew better. I finished my drink and started shutting down the electronics. Tommy tried to bring up a heavy trap. Mike answered the knocking. Both of them went into the water the same night. Jesus. The sea doesn't care about prayers, kid, I said. Just rules. Over the next 2 weeks, we settled into a rhythm. Learned to feel the weather in his bones. To read the way the boat moved through different water. I taught him the knots that would hold when everything else failed. Showed him how to band lobster claws without getting pinched. Covered for him when he spilled bait on the deck and Captain Reeves was watching. The supernatural encounters kept coming, but they were smaller now, more manageable. The lantern flickered every few nights, and Danny never tried to fix it. We heard knocking maybe once a week, and he never responded. Twice more we cut heavy lines, and both times, something large moved away from the boat in the darkness. Danny was changing. The eager college kid who'd shown up that first night was gone, replaced by someone who understood that the ocean had rules older than any textbook. He stopped asking questions about the weird stuff, just accepted it as part of the job. Smart kid. One night, when the fog was thin and the stars showed clear, I told him about the memorial plaque down at the harbor master's office. 14. Names and bronze fishermen who'd gone missing in these waters over the past decade. Half of them worked this boat, I said. All of them broke the rules. Danny studied the stars reflected in the dark water. Why do you keep taking on greenhorns if they keep disappearing? I thought about that. Hope, I guess, I said. Maybe the next one will listen. Maybe the cycle break. You think I'm different? He said. You've lasted longer than most, I said. 3 weeks without a major incident. That's a record. I lit a cigarette, cupping my hand against the wind. But the sea's patient. She'll test you when you least expect it. The weather turned worse as November wore on 20-foot swells. 45-knot winds, fog so thick you couldn't see your own hands. The Mary Catherine took it all, but she groaned louder and the bilge pump ran more often. Danny handled it like he'd been born to it, moving around the deck with the easy confidence of someone who'd learned to read the boat's moods. We were pulling traps in particularly nasty. Weather when the line came up heavy again this time, though something felt different. The weight shifted, moved like whatever was down there was alive and fighting. "Cut it," Danny said before I could speak. I looked at him, surprised. "You sure?" "Rule 6, he said. "Cut it loose." I smiled first. Time and weak sand sliced through the line. Below us, something thrashed away into the depths, and for just a moment, the fog cleared enough to show a shape too large and too wrong to be any fish I'd ever seen. "Good call, kid," I said. That night I shared the rum again. Danny had earned it and more. He was learning not just the rules, but the instincts that kept you alive out here. The way the water sounded different when something was watching. The feel of the boat when she wanted to go home, the taste of fog that carried more than moisture. "You're doing all right," I told him as we headed back to harbor. "Better than all right?" Danny nodded, but I could see the weight settling on him. It's 3 weeks of night shifts, of following rules that made no sense until you needed them. Pretending not to see the things that moved in the fog. It changes a man. The lights of the harbor looked warm and welcoming as we approached the dock. Normal lights, safe lights. Behind us, the fog bank waited offshore like a living thing, patient and predatory. Tomorrow night we'd go back out. And the night after that, the sea would test us again. But for now, Danny had proven himself. He'd listened. He'd learned. He'd survived. Maybe this one would be different. Maybe the cycle would break. Or maybe the sea was just taking her time. As we tied up at the dock, I caught sight of the memorial plaque in the harbor light. 14 names in bronze and room for more. Always room for more, but not tonight. Tonight we'd both made it home. The fog rolled closer to shore as we walked up the dock. And somewhere in its gray depths, something knocked 3 times against. The hull of an empty boat, the weather report that Tuesday night, should have been warning enough. Heavy fog bank rolling in from the northeast. Visibility dropping to near zero by 2 a.m. Engine trouble started before we even cleared the harbor. Mary Catherine's diesel, coughing like an old man with too many cigarettes behind him. "She's running rough," Danny said, checking the oil pressure gauge. The kid had good instincts now. 3 weeks of night shifts had taught him to read the boat's moods. "She hold," I told him, but I wasn't so sure. The hydraulic system was wheezing, and the bilge pump kept cycling every few minutes instead of its usual rhythm. Wrong sounds, all wrong. We hit the first string of traps just after midnight. The fog was already thickening, turning the running lights into smeared ghosts of red and green. Denny worked the lines efficiently. He'd gotten good at this banding clause without getting pinched. Measuring with the brass gauge like he'd been doing it for years, that's when the foghorn started. One blast long and mournful, cutting through the mist like a knife. Danny looked up from the trap he was baiting, thought we were the only boat out here. "We are," I said. I cut the engine. Let us drift. Silence pressed in around us, thick. As the fog itself, water lapped against the hull. The electronic hum of the depth sounder. Nothing else. Then it came again. 3 blasts this time. Long, deliberate. Exactly what the rules warned about. "Below deck," I said. Now, Danny's face went white. He'd been out here long enough to know that tone in my voice meant, "Don't ask questions, just move." He disappeared down into the cabin without a word. I should have felt relief. The kid was finally learning to listen, but something felt different tonight. The fog wasn't just thick, it was wrong. Moving against the wind, swirling in patterns that made no sense. And underneath the usual smell of salt and diesel, something else. Something that reminded me of low tide and dead fish. The engine coughed again. Oil pressure dropping, temperature climbing. Danny climbed back up. After maybe 10 minutes, his movements careful and quiet. How long do we? That's when I heard it. The starboard bait locker, metal hinges creaking. I turned. The damn thing was standing wide open. Did you? I already knew the answer. Danny was looking at it too. His face pale in the red glow of the port running light. I didn't touch it, he said. It was locked when we came aboard. I checked. Rule number 2. Never open the starboard bait locker after 2 a.m. I looked at my watch. 2:17. The boat rocked. Gentle swells pushing us sideways. Something splashed. Nearby, too big for a seal, too deliberate for debris. The fog pressed closer, and I couldn't see past the bow anymore. We're heading in, I said, reaching for the ignition. The engine turned over, coughed, died. I tried again. Nothing but clicking from the starter. The lantern on the mast flickered once, twice, then went dark. Danny's hand moved toward the switch. Pure reflex. I'll get it, don't, I said, my voice harsher than I intended. Rule 3. Leave it dark, he nodded, his hand falling away. But I could see the fear building in his eyes. 3 weeks of following the rules without question, and now everything was going wrong at once. The knocking started then. Slow, deliberate raps against the hull, 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more. Like someone down there was testing the fiberglass, learning where we were weak. Danny moved closer to me, away from the rail. Good, he remembered Rule 4. But then the knocking changed. Faster now. More insistent. Moving along the boat's length like whatever was making it was circling us, studying us. What do they want? Danny whispered. Before I could answer, he did the one thing I'd told him never to do. He knocked back. 3 sharp raps with his knuckles against the wheelhouse window. The silence that followed was complete. No engine noise, no bilge pump, no electronic hum. Even the waves seemed to stop moving. Then the fog exploded around us. They came up over. The rails like nightmares given flesh barnacle-crusted humanoids, skin pale and stretched tight over too many bones. Black hair plastered to their skulls, dripping seawater that hissed where it hit the deck. Eyes like holes punched in there. Faces deeper than the ocean itself. One of them slithered through the open bait locker hatch, its movements too fluid for anything with bones. It rose up in the stern, head cocked at an angle that would have snapped a human neck. The boat lurched. Something massive had latched onto the keel below, pulling us down toward the cold bottom. The Mary Catherine groaned, her old hull flexing. Under forces she wasn't built to handle. Get to the cabin, I shouted, grabbing for the flare gun in the emergency kit. Danny stood frozen, staring at the thing that had come through the bait locker. It stared back, its black eyes reflecting. The red running light like polished stones. More of them were climbing aboard wet hands with too many joints, fingers ending in yellowed claws that scraped against the fiberglass. The smell hit me then, low tide and rotting kelp and something deeper, older. The smell of things that had been dead too long to remember what living felt like. The boat tilted. Water sloshed across the deck. Whatever was below us wasn't just pulling anymore. It was crushing, trying to crack the hull like an egg. Danny. I fired the flare. Red light exploded across the fog. For just a moment, I could see them. Clearly a dozen of them, maybe more, moving with purpose across my boat. Get below deck. The kid wasn't listening anymore. Tara had locked him up, same as it got all the greenhorns. It was backing toward the galley hatch. The one I'd told him stayed locked for a reason. The hatch was standing open. No, I lunged forward, but one of the creatures was between us now. It turned toward me, its mouth opening to show rows of teeth like broken shells. Danny disappeared through the galley hatch. I heard him scream once, sharp and desperate, then nothing. The boat lurched again, harder this time. Water poured over. The rails, whatever was below us, wasn't just pulling anymore. It was crushing, just trying to crack the hull like an eggshell. I had maybe 30 seconds before she went under. The flare gun was empty. The radio was dead. I could jump, try to reach the life raft. Maybe make it to shore if the current was right. Or I could go after Danny. down into that flooded galley where God knew what was waiting. The deck hit. It's 45 degrees. Decision time. I'm not proud of what I chose. I'm still here to tell you about it. I went over the rail just as the Mary Catherine's lights disappeared under the black water. Managed to grab a life ring and kick away from the suction as she went down. The fog swallowed everything: the boat, the screams, Danny's last desperate call for help. I floated there in the cold Atlantic until dawn, watching the sun burn away the mist like it had never been there at all. The Coast Guard picked me up. 6 hours later, hypothermic, but alive. I told them the engine failed. Told them Danny fell overboard in the confusion. Told them a lot of things that weren't quite lies, but weren't the truth either. They found pieces of the Mary Catherine. Washed up on Seal Island 3 days later, never found Danny. They added his name to the memorial plaque. Number 15, Captain Reeves offered me another boat the next week. Another greenhorn, a fresh-faced kid named Marcus, who thought he knew what he was getting into. I looked at him across the harbor office desk, this eager young fool who reminded me way too much of Danny in those first days. I thought about the rules, about fog that moved against the wind, about things with too many teeth that lived in the dark water. Follow the rules, kid, I told him as we walked down to the dock. Or you'll end up just another name I don't say out loud. The cycle starts. Again, tomorrow, it always does. Dawn broke like a mourner's sigh over the Atlantic, slow and heavy with reluctant light. The sky was bruised purple-gray, streaking toward pale gold that promised nothing but cold and regret. Below me, the sea lay still as death, a black mirror reflecting the mournful colors above, while refusing to give back what it had taken. I floated alone on a jagged piece of fiberglass that might have once been part of the Mary Catherine's wheelhouse. My hands, numb and cramping, clung to a life ring that had lost most of its buoyancy hours ago. Salt had crusted in my beard, and my legs dangled useless in water, so cold I'd stopped feeling them sometime before midnight. Around me, oil slicks, spread across the water in rainbow patterns, the only proof the Mary Catherine had ever existed. 23 years she'd worked these waters. Gone in minutes when the things below decided they were hungry. The silence was complete now. No engine noise, no radio chatter, no sounds of other survivors calling through the fog. Just me and the gentle slap of waves against my makeshift raft. Counting the hours until hypothermia finished what the creatures hadn't, Danny was gone. Had been gone since the moment he disappeared through the galley hatch, his scream cutting through the night before the water swallowed everything. I'd made my choice. Jump for the life ring instead of following him down into that flooded tomb, the practical choice, survival choice. The choice that would let me live with 15 names on my conscience instead of becoming the 16th. The coast. Guard cutter found me just after 7 a.m., their spotlight cut through the early fog like Judgment Day. They hauled me aboard with practiced efficiency. These boys had pulled bodies from the water before. Knew the routine. Blankets around my shoulders, coffee that burned going down, questions asked in voices that suggested they didn't really want answers. Equipment failure, I told the officer taking notes. The same story I'd told 14 times before. Came in thick around 2 a.m. engine, started acting up, then died completely. Bilge pump couldn't keep up with the water coming in. The officer nodded, writing it down. How many crew aboard? 2, I said. Me and Danny Morrison. I paused, tasting the salt and bitterness. Danny didn't make it to a life ring. The officer looked up from his clipboard. It's just the 2 of you? That's unusual for a trap boat. Hot-handed. I said, hard to find reliable crew. Another lie layered on top of truth. But easier than explaining about the 14 other greenhorns who'd disappeared into the fog over the years. By the time we reached harbor, the sun was climbing higher, painting the water in cheerful blues and greens that mocked what I'd been through. Weekend boaters were already heading out, families with coolers, full of beer and dreams of catching something worth photographing. I had no idea what waited beyond the fog line. The memorial plaque outside the harbor master's office caught the morning light. Bronze names gleaming like accusations. 14 fishermen who'd learned the rules too late. Now there'd be 15. Danny Morrison, age 22. I stood there longer than I should have. tracing the letters with eyes that burned from more than just salt spray. Each name a face, a story. A kid who'd thought he was ready for what the sea could teach, Amiris, who'd tried to bring up a trap that was too heavy. Mike Caulfield, who'd answered the knocking. Kevin Morrison, no relation to Danny Hood, opened the bait locker at the wrong time. All good kids. All dead because they'd broken the rules when fear overrode their training. Captain Reeves found me there. His weathered face creased with the kind of concern that came from losing too many boats over the years. "Frank," he said quietly. "Hell of a thing." "Hell of a thing," I agreed, not trusting my voice with more. "Walk me through it again." We went to his office, the same cramped space where I'd given the same report 14 times before. The same wooden chair that had held my weight through 14 other debriefings, each one carving deeper lines into my face. Fog came in. "Thick," I said, settling into the chair that knew my shape too well. "Thicker than the forecast called for. Moving against the wind, swirling in patterns that didn't make sense. Engine started coughing around midnight, died completely by 1 a.m. Reeves nodded, making notes he'd probably file away with all the others, and the Morrison boy, letting him fill in the blanks. "Good kid, learned fast," followed orders. But when the boat started going down, panic makes people do stupid things. Any idea what caused the hull breach? I met his eyes. Something big hit us from below. Could have been debris, could have been a whale. Hard to tell in the fog. Another lie, but one he'd accept. Easier than explaining about the things with too many joints climbing over the rails, about the sounds that came from the flooded galley, about Danny's scream cutting through the night before the water swallowed it. "I'll need to contact his family," Reeves said. He mentioned an uncle in Portsmouth. Ran charter boats, taught him the basics. "Good teacher," I said. The kid knew his way around a boat better than most. The rest of the morning passed in a haze of paperwork and official sympathy. Coast Guard forms, insurance claims, accident reports that reduced Danny's death to checkboxes and typed statements. By noon, I was free to go home, to try to wash the salt and memories from my skin. My apartment above the bait shop felt smaller than usual, the walls pressing in with the weight of what I'd seen. The silence was worse than the cramped space, no. Engine noise, no radio chatter, no eager voice asking questions about the rules. I opened the closet where I kept the belongings of all the kids who hadn't made it home. 14 sets of gear, carefully folded and stored like exhibits in a museum of good intentions. Tommy Reese's wool sweater, still carrying the faint scent of his mother's perfume. Mike Caulfield's lucky hat, worn soft from years of use. Kevin Morrison's work gloves that had barely been broken in. Each piece of clothing, a reminder. A weight I carried for boys who trusted me to keep them alive. Now Danny's jacket would join them salt-stained and torn from my time in the water. His notebook was still in the inner pocket, pages soggy, but readable. 7 rules written in his careful handwriting, like commandments he'd copied from some unholy scripture. Rule 1. If the foghorn blows 3 times after midnight, get below deck. Rule 2. Never open the starboard bait locker after 2 a.m. Rule 3. If the lantern goes out, don't relight it. Rule 4. Don't knock back. Turn away from the figure on the rocks. Rule 6. Cut the heavy lines. Rule 7. The galley hatch locks for a reason. 7 rules that had kept him alive for 3 weeks, till the night he broke the 4th one and knocked back against the hull. 3 quick raps that might as well have been his death warrant. I folded the jacket carefully, placed the notebook on top, and added it to the collection. 15 sets of gear now. Closet was getting crowded. But there was always room for more. There was always room for more. The afternoon dragged by with the weight of exhaustion and survivor's guilt. I tried to sleep, but I kept hearing Danny's voice, eager and earnest as. He asked about the rules that first night, kept seeing his face when the things started climbing aboard. The terror replacing the confidence he'd built up over 3 weeks of following orders, kept hearing that moment when he knocked back 3 sharp raps against the wheelhouse window. And everything went to hell. At 3 p.m., the phone rang. I stared at it for 5 rings before picking up, knowing what? It would be Frank. Captain Reeves's voice was careful, neutral. Got a young man here looking for work. Marcus Webb, 21, says he's got some experience on charter boats down in Boston. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight settle in my chest. The cycle never stopped. Never paused to let you catch your breath. The sea was patient, but never. Idle, always hungry for the next eager kid who thought he understood what hard work meant. Bring him by at 5, I said. I'll look him over. Frank, you sure you're ready after last night? The boats need to run, Captain, I said. Bills. Need paying. Kid needs work. I lit a cigarette with shaking fingers, watching the flame dance in the afternoon light streaming through my window. Might as well be me that trains him. It's better than some yahoo who doesn't know the rules. Marcus showed up exactly at 5 p.m., standing on the dock with the kind of eager confidence that reminded me too much of Danny. Tall and lanky, with calloused hands that suggested real work experience. His gear looked new, but not unused foul-weather pants without patches, his boots that had seen some wear but weren't falling apart. Mr. Sullivan, he said, Captain Reeves said you might have worked for me. I looked him over, noting the steady way he stood despite the gentle rocking of the dock, the way his eyes took in the harbor and the other boats without gawking like a tourist. The kid had been on the water before, knew enough not to embarrass himself. Night work, I said. Lobster traps. 12-hour shifts. Weather doesn't matter. Sea state doesn't matter. You work when I say work. Sleep when I say sleep. Follow every order exactly as given. Nodded eagerly. Yes, sir. I'm ready for whatever you need.
That's
what they all said. Ready for whatever, as if they could imagine the things that waited beyond the fog line. The sounds that came from beneath the black water. The choice between following rules that made no sense and joining the names on a bronze plaque. There are rules, I continued, watching his face carefully. 7 of them. They might sound strange. It might not make sense to you. But you follow them exactly, or you don't work for me. No exceptions. No questions asked. I understand. He said no, he didn't. None of them ever did. Not until it was too late. But he'd learn. Same as all the others. The sea was a thorough teacher, even if the lessons sometimes killed you. We start tomorrow night, I said. Meet me at the dock at 11 o'clock sharp. I'll have another boat by then. I turned to walk away, then stopped. Words came out without me planning them. The same words I'd said to Tommy and Mike and Danny and all the rest. Follow the rules, kid, I said. Or you'll end up just another name I don't say out loud. Marcus nodded, still eager, still confident. He'd last longer than most. I could see it in the way he moved, the steadiness in his hands. Maybe 3 weeks. Maybe 4 if he was smart and lucky. But the sea was patient. She'd test him when he least expected it. Probe for weakness, until she found the crack that let the fear in. And when that moment came, when the fog rolled in thick and the things below started knocking against the hull, he'd make the same choice they all made. Follow the rules. Or break them and feed the depths. I walked back to my truck, the weight of 15 jackets in my closet pressing down like the ocean itself. Tomorrow night, we'd take another boat out into the dark. The cycle would continue. It always did. Behind me, the fog was already starting to form on the horizon, creeping toward shore like fingers, reaching for the unwary. Somewhere in that gray wall, things waited and watched and planned, patient as the tide. The memorial plaque would need a bigger space soon. There was always room for one more name.